reminding ourselves both of our outline and of our keys to studying the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation, the theme is about victory in the Lamb. We've said the key verse is chapter 17 and then verse 14. These make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. And so as we've said throughout the book, that along with the message that we've seen in chapter 4 and 5, that God is on his throne, is really the two sort of main themes throughout the book, this one being the one talked about the most. The outline of the book is divided down into two sections. 1 to 11 is conflict on earth. 12 to 22, conflict between the Lamb and the dragon. Again, 12 to 22 is still where we have the section that talks about the fall of Babylon the Great. That section is where probably the section we're familiar with, it really deals with the downfall of Rome. However, 1 to 11 is really dealing with the conflict that's taking place on earth, and 12 to 22 is the explanation as to why there's ultimately war between the Lamb and the dragon, or between Christ and Satan. We want to remind ourselves quickly of our rules for studying the book of Revelation. These become particularly important, or not particularly important, but these are very important for today's study, as they are with a number of them, because of some misconceptions that are had when these rules are broken. First, the rules. Number one, remember the book was written to encourage the people of John's day. Because we may not perfectly understand every symbolism and what exactly it means, doesn't mean we can't get the thrust of the book. We can't get the main theme that is being pointed out. Number two, remember the book is largely symbolic. Number three, that it heavily used Old Testament terminology. Number four, not to press the details of the symbolism. Number five, to interpret it in light of clear biblical passages. And number six, visualize or picture the visions in your mind. Rule one, 2 and 4, as we've been mentioning time and time again, all go hand in hand. Because the book is symbolic, we want to make sure that we're not trying to spend forever pressing this, and written for the people that day, we want to make sure we're not pressing the symbolism to where we're saying, okay, well, what could it mean? If we get so bogged down in the details, we miss the point. We're ready for chapter 7 now, though. Revelation 7. I would title chapter 7, The Sealing of God's People. Key verse is verse 3, and I'll come to that in a minute. But before we get to verse 3, I'm going to go back to the end of chapter 6 for just a moment. Chapter 6 ended this way when we studied it on, well, whenever you studied, but on Wednesday we ended with this. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Do you remember going back in the scenes that we're in? Chapter 4 is the throne scene. God is on his throne and in control. Chapter 5 is the Lamb and the scroll. There's a scroll in the right hand of the one on the throne. The question is who can open it. Originally, the answer is no one, but then the Lamb, also called the Lion, was found worthy. Then the rest of chapter 5 is praising the Lamb for his worthiness, and we don't actually start opening the scrolls or the seals of the scroll until chapter 6. Then on Wednesday, we studied chapter 6. The first seal, the white horse, the triumph of the gospel. The second seal, the red horse, the persecution that follows the gospel. The third seal, the black horse, we said is the economic restrictions placed on those who were serving God. The fourth seal, the pale horse, is death, likely referring to just the things of life that can kill anyway outside of the persecution. The fifth seal, again, commentators are divided on those, but the fifth and sixth seal, there's pretty much agreement. Fifth seal, souls under the altar, that's those persecuted asking how long. And then the final one is the earthquake, the sun being black, the moon like blood, the stars of heaven falling, the skies receding, the mountain and the islands are moved. We said those are Old Testament terms referring to the downfall of a people and the judgment of God. We cited that the earthquake, the sun being darkened, the moon as blood, Isaiah 13:10, 24:23, 34:4, Joel 2:10, use similar terminology for judgment. Stars falling, downfall of rulers, Isaiah 14:12. We'll come back to the falling stars later in another scene in the book later. The sky is receding as scrolls, Isaiah 34:4 is used as the downfall of nations. Ezekiel 26:15, verse 18, and 27:35 talk about the islands being shaken or moved. And so judgment is coming. Now, we're sort of looking ahead. At this point, we just know judgment's coming. And I think the judgment is judgment on the people oppressing the Christians. Some say it's the end of time. I don't think it's the end of time. I think evidence suggests it has to be judgment on who is oppressing Israel, which again, taking the late date, we think is Rome. Take the early date, Jerusalem. But whoever's oppressing them is who is being discussed. And they're trying to flee, so much so that the judgment is so bad. Normally, if you face an earthquake, you want to try to get somewhere to keep things from falling on you. Yet when this earthquake happens and the skies are darkened, they're asking the mountains to fall on them. They're trying, those that are being judged are trying to run away and get away from the judgment. Well, the question then in verse 17 is, the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Chapter 7 now is an interlude. And what I mean by that is, if just for a second, if you're reading through, you can read it this way, just to see the point. Read chapter 6, skip chapter 7, go to chapter 8. And if you didn't know chapter 7 was in the middle between them and you didn't have the numbers, you probably wouldn't think you had missed anything in terms of chapter 6 ends with the opening of the sixth seal. Chapter 8 begins with the opening of the seventh seal, right? This is an interlude. It's a section between. Chapter 7 is the answer to the question asked in verse 17 of chapter 6. Who's able to stand? That is, who's able to escape the wrath of God? The answer is found in chapter 7. It's those that are God's people. We'll explain more about that as we move through the text. The key verse, as we said, is verse 3. Do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And we'll talk more about sealing in a minute. We'll talk more about the number 144,000 as we move along. But right now, let's just go back and get the picture of what's taking place first. After these things, verse 7. After what things? The opening of the first 6 seals, particularly the opening of the 6th seal. After these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Now, the question in verse 1, or the thing in verse 1, is do not harm till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. That's what verse 3 is about. But the reason is that in verse 1, the first thing that is being discussed in verse 1 is the angels are standing there. 4 angels are standing at the 4 corners of the earth. Again, the earth is round. There's not a literal 4 corners. We're dealing with symbolic language. They're standing at all parts of the earth, holding back the wind until something. Now, we'll get to what that is in a minute. But what exactly is the wind? Well, Jeremiah 49:36 and 51:1 and 2. I'll cite those for you. For the winds, we'll read those in a second, but there are several. This list here, I'm not going to go to every one of these. Time will not permit us to trace every one of these in detail. If you want to jot them down real quick, these are a number of references in the Old Testament where the winds are used of God's power in judgment. I'll look at a couple of them here. Jeremiah 49:36. Against Elam I will bring the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of heaven. Chapter 51:1 and 2. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up against Babylon, against those who dwell in Leb-Kamai, a destroying wind, and I will send winnowers to Babylon, who shall winnow her and empty her land, for in the day of doom they shall be against her all around. Again, Jeremiah 4:11 and 12, 18:17, verse 32 of chapter 49, verse 36, 51:1 and 2, Ezekiel 5:2, Ezekiel 12:14, Isaiah 41:16, are all references where the wind is used of God's power and God's judgment. So when they're told to hold back the wind, they're holding back the wind and told to hold it back in verse 3, what is taking place is they're saying that God's judgment is coming, but there's something that needs to happen what? Before, which again we'll get to in verse 3, the sealing of God's people. So, what is he saying in verse 1? Well, if we harmonize this with chapter 6, God's judgment is coming. Now, again, we know it's coming on Rome, or, if we take the late date, if you take the early date, Jerusalem, We don't really get more details into who it's coming on until later in the book. But right now, we know looking ahead, we're looking a little bit ahead, but it's coming on the enemy of the Christians. So God's judgment is coming on Rome, but God's going to protect his people. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be spared from death, right? It may be that they lose their life, but God's going to know his people. Remember 2 Timothy 2:19? Nevertheless, the solid foundation of God stands, having this seal: the Lord knows those who are his. Again, we'll get more into the seal in a minute. But when you take what is taking place here, God's coming in judgment. Doesn't mean he's going to spare them from death. They may lose their life, but guess what? God's going to know who's his people. And so that's why there's a sealing that's going to take place here in verse 3 in a minute. They will ultimately be victorious. We see that, I think, in the latter half of the chapter. Let's go to verse 2 now. Then I saw another angel. So there's the four holding back the winds. Then there's another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads. So God's judgment is coming in verse 1. Right? The winds are there, and they're being held back for the time. And the fifth angel comes in and tells the first four to not let those go yet, right? Don't let those winds go yet. Do not harm the earth, the sea. That's what the winds are doing to do. Do not harm the earth, the sea, till we have sealed the servants of our God. Now, what exactly does he mean by seal? Well, I think it's Harkrider that chases this out in his commentary, that he points out that in the Bible there are three purposes of sealing, and this you'll find in your workbook as well. There are three purposes of sealing as you see in the Bible. Something is sealed to try to protect it from tampering. In Matthew 27:66, the tomb was secured, sealing the stone and setting the guard. So they put a stone, but Matthew's account says they sealed the stone, right? They were trying to protect it from tampering. Song of Solomon 8 and in verse 6, set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for the love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave, its flame are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. I'm not going to get into what Song of Solomon 8 is about, but the point is that there's supposed to be some sense of ownership. Seal me upon your heart as though I am yours. The other one is sealing is used of certification. It was used that way under the old, or not under the old law, but by the Medes and the Persians. You remember in Esther chapter 3 and in verse 12. When in Esther 3 and in verse 12, the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all the people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus, it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And so, when you think about that sealing and the purposes of sealing, sealing is to protect from tampering. Sealing was used of ownership. Sealing was used of certification. And Harkrider says this in his commentary, mentioning these things as well. A biblical seal indicates several things. A, protection against tampering, Matthew 27:66. B, ownership, Song of Solomon 8:6. And C, certification, Esther 3:12. All of these meanings are true of Christians who are under God's protection, purchased by the blood of Christ, and certified by the Spirit to be the sons of God, Ephesians 1:13, Romans 8:16. And I think he's right. You take this idea of a seal, whether it's for certification or protection or ownership. God, when he seals his people, they're mine. They're my people. I'm certifying they're my people, but I am also going to be with them and to protect them. And I think you see that in this case, in Revelation 7, the four winds are coming, right? The winds are coming from the four corners of the earth to bring judgment, and yet God says, or the angel says that God's people are going to first be sealed on their forehead. So God is saying, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to protect you. You're my people. Well, now, verse 4 gives us their number. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000. Now, we'll come back to those more in a minute. But we'll go ahead and read through verse 8. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. So, this number here, at times in the religious world, much is made of this number. So let's begin with this. One of our rules, and this is why we talk about this rule, is very important. The book is highly what? Symbolic. Right? John took, and it was signified, Revelation 1 and in verse 1. The number 144,000 is not to be taken literal. Now, again, we'll talk about exactly what I think it means in a minute. But the number is not to be taken literal. I want you to think about some things that if this number is literal, also has to be literal. First of all, if it's 144,000, then 139,999 or 144,001, those are incorrect. It's a perfect, exact 144,000. If the number is literal, where were the number taken from? Verses 5 through 8 of the tribes of Israel, right? So if that's the case, then whatever this number represents can only be of physical Israel. Why? Well, if the number's literal, so too must be the interpretation of the tribes. Now, keep your finger here. I want you to jump ahead with me for a second to chapter 14. Chapter 14. When we finish this, we'll reference it again later. When we finish this chapter, we're not done with the 144,000. We're going to come back to them in chapter 14. But I want you to just notice a couple of things said about this 144,000 in chapter 14. Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on the mountain, or on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written on their foreheads. Sound familiar? It's those of chapter 7. Listen to what else is said. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder, and I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. So, if the number is taken literal, so too must everything else. If the number 144,000 is literal, it is 144,000 virgins of Israel. That's all. If the number is literal, that's the conclusion we have to reach. Well, the number is not literal. It's symbolic. Well, what does it mean? Well, let's go back again to our numbers that we started with in the book of the beginning of Revelation. Let's start. We're going to have to break this down, and then we'll see how we get to 144,000. I've got it broken down for you on the screen. The number 12 represents God's people. Remember chapter 4? There were 24 thrones, and we said that likely represents the number 24 being all of God's people under the Old Testament, 12 patriarchs, 12 tribes. All of God's people under the New Testament, the 12 apostles, right? 24. Well, the number 12 represents God's people. The number 10 means completeness. So, the number 144,000 is 12 times 12, and 10 times plus that should be 10 times 10 times 10, 10, 10, and 10. You multiply it all out, or you multiply everything out, you got 144,000. So, when you break the number down, it is the number of God's people and the number for completeness. I think this likely represents all of God's people on earth at a given time. Could it be more than 144,000? Yes. Less? Yes. I think what it's representing is not all of God's people of all time. I think that's represented in the 24 elders. And I think that's represented to the great multitude we're going to get to in a minute as well. But 144,000 I think is representing God's people on earth at a given time. That is, those that he's sealing here are those who are on earth, because there's going to be another sealing taking place later in the book where it talks about those who have the stamp on their forehead, not about Satan, but of Christ in chapter 22. We have 144,000 sealed here in chapter 7. We have more mentioned later on. I'll circle back to that when we talk about the great multitude in chapter 22 and in verse 4. All of God's people are sealed. So what I think this number represents is all of God's people on earth at a given time, saying, what God is saying is, you're serving me faithfully. I've sealed you. You're my people. I will protect you. I'll keep you from being tampered with. You stay with me, and nobody's going to get you. You stay with me because you are mine, right? We're bought for a price. You stay with me, and I have certified that you are mine. I know you are mine. And so I think that's what he's representing here is, despite everything going on, and you've got this persecution taking place, and a lot of people are losing their lives or going to prison, remember this: God knows the people that are his. And even though they may lose their life, even though some of them may be caught up to some extent in what's going to take place to Rome, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can have confidence knowing the Lord has sealed you. You know what? You walk down the street, and we're talking about people that know us. People that know us should know we live different from the world. But you just walk by somebody in Walmart, it's not like we have a literal stamp on our forehead and they walk by and they go, you know what? That person's a Christian. Right? If you put a group of 100 people together, we'll say in the wintertime, then everybody's going to be bundled up anyway. It'll make it easier to tell. You put everybody in a big room in the wintertime, and you're standing there and you say, okay, here's 100 people and 10 of them are Christians. Which 10 is it? And you're just sort of glossing over the crowd. You may not be able to tell, but guess who can? God can, because his people are sealed. He knows they are his. Go to verse 9 now. Well, I'm back. Verse 9 through the end is the great multitude around the throne. Verse 9, after these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, people, and tongues, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed, and with white robes with palm branches in their hands. There are a few views as to what this great multitude is. Because we had earlier a numbering of 144,000. Now what is said in verse 9 is there's a multitude that just cannot be numbered. So what is the multitude? Well, some believe and argue that it is Gentile. And the argument is only those mentioned in 1 to 8 are Jews. Let's again back up to this. The book of Revelation is highly symbolic. I don't think when he lists the tribes that he's saying that's those of Israel. I think he's talking about spiritual Israel, right? Those are my people. Okay, so it's not that he's saying they're from the line of Jacob itself on down that line. They are spiritual Israel. In fact, let me sort of jump ahead here. All of God's people are going to be sealed in chapter 22 and in verse 4. So if this is the case, then only Jews are sealed, and God just sort of leaves the Gentiles not to be sealed, and they're just sort of left to their own. I don't think it can be the Gentiles. Now, the 144,000 is talked about a lot by Jehovah's Witness. You talk to a Jehovah's Witness, they'll talk about the 144,000. That number, by the way, they would tell you is reached, the 144,000. If they take it literally, they believe that the great multitude is what they call the earth class. So that is 144,000, not getting in all of it, 144,000 are the ones that get to go to heaven. The rest, the earth class, if you will, are the ones left on a renovated earth. That's the idea that's had there. Well, the 144,000 in verse 9 are found where? A great multitude which could not be numbered, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne. Where's the throne? Heaven. So whoever these are can't be this earth class, and there isn't an earth class, but it can't be that, because where are we finding them? In heaven. The 144,000, as we mentioned, are brought back again later in the book. So we're not done with them yet. We're going to circle back around. And we also know from chapter 22 and in verse 4 that all of God's people are sealed. They shall see his face, and his name shall be on their foreheads, after talking about the judgment scene and being in heaven. This, I think, in this chapter is God's people around the throne, meaning it is the 144,000 if you look ahead. Remember that. Let's put it in today's terms. all of those, if we're right about our definition of 144,000, it's all of God's people on earth at a given time. That would mean we're part of the today's what? 144,000. But what happened to the 144,000 when the book was written? Where are they now? They're awaiting judgment, and when judgment comes, they'll be around the throne. So I think the great multitude is just God's people in heaven. That would include the 144,000. I think Harkrider's right. That means it includes those of 6, 9 to 11. It's the souls that are, the souls under the altar crying out, "How long, O Lord?" The ones that have already been put to death. Where are they going to be? They're going to be around the throne. It's all those who've overcome, as he told those here in Revelation, which again would be part of that 144 if we're right about our definition. You overcome, where are they going to be? Go to the end of the book, you're going to be around the throne. So again, meaning all those that are sealed. But I think what the great multitude is the beginning in 1 to 8 is God saying, "You're my people, and I recognize you're my people, and I will be with you." 9 through the end of the chapter is almost a look ahead to the end that says, this is what's going to take place in the end. Fight everything they're bringing against you, where are you going to be? Sure, faithfully, you're going to be around the throne, praising God. Go back to verse 9 now. Verse 9 through 12, the multitude praises God. "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, 'Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb.' All the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the 4 living creatures, and fell on their face before the throne, and worshiping God, saying, 'Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen.'" As you look, as you look at what's taking place here, they're praising God. What do we find them clothed in? White robes. What does white represent? Purity. You've lived pure. Now where are you? You're around the throne. Promise he made back in chapter 2. Palm branches, likely a reference not to the Old Testament, but actually to the triumphal entrance of Christ. That would be something that was spread out as he entered in. They're crying, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb." Salvation, and that's how they have salvation, but perhaps being there in heaven, they're saying the ultimate fulfillment of salvation, the reason we are here is because of the Father and the Lamb. Verse 13 now. "Then one of the elders answered me, saying, 'Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from?'" Verse 13, that should be 13 and 14. So one of the elders asked John, "Who are these and where did they come? Who's this great multitude?" John says, "Sir, you know." I don't think he's meaning this disrespectfully. He's saying, you know what? You'd be better equipped to answer that question than I am. And the answer that the elder gives to him is, "These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Quite the picture if you're a Roman soldier or somebody in the Roman government and you intercept this letter and you're reading, and all of a sudden these people's garments are white because they washed it in blood. And so that makes no sense to the enemy, right? We talked about that at the beginning. It makes no sense to them, but it does to the Christians. They're pure because of the blood of Christ. That's why they have this hope. 15 to 17 now. "Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in this temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of waters. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." Again, I think a flash forward to chapter 21 and 22 in heaven. So what happened to those that overcome? What happened to those who wash their robes in the blood of the Lamb? They get to be before the throne, before God, and with the Lamb. So despite everything they're going through, you're sitting there right now, and you're one of these, member of one of these 7 churches, and this persecution is picking up, and everything's going on. And you're thinking, how long is this going to happen? Those that have already gone are crying out in the 5th seal, "How long, O Lord?" And you've seen others die, and you think, well, how can I remain faithful? And now you have this promise. You remain faithful. I've sealed you. I know you're mine. And in the end, you're going to get to be around the throne. You're going to get to be with the Father, and you're going to get to be with the Lamb because you washed your robes in the blood of the Lamb. What a wonderful thought for those here that John is writing to. Before we get to these final seals, when judgment comes, just remember this. While God's coming in judgment on Rome, Don't worry. Whether your life's already taken from you, whether you're in prison, whether your life's taken from you maybe because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, whatever it is, remember this. You're my people, and you have the promise that you get to be with me forever. Lord willing, on Wednesday, we're going to pick up in chapter 8. We're going to open the final seal, which by opening the final seal means we're going to start talking about these 7 trumpets.